Department of Forest and Environment, and I have with me Mr. Saurabh Chaudhary, who is the nodal officer for this scheme that we are going to discuss. Otherwise, he is the member secretary of the West Bengal Zoo Authority, but here he wears another cap, and he is the nodal officer for the scheme that I am just about to present to you. Okay, so first of all, let me tell you that Sundarbans you are all aware of. Sundarbans, you are all aware that is the world's largest delta. It is about 4,000 square kilometers in West Bengal, and there's another 6,000 square kilometers which falls in Bangladesh. So this is an area which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It is also a Ramsar biodiversity site. It's known all over the world, and particularly under the threat of climate change, global warming, the existence of Sundarbans as a fragile biodiversity zone is now a topic for discussion across the world. What we present here today is a unique enterprise that the government of West Bengal has embarked upon since last year, but it has accelerated this year, which is basically harnessing or embracing nature's solutions for protecting this very fragile geographical area from repeated natural disasters. Sundarbans, as you may know, is basically a landmass which is below the mean sea level, which means it is a constant challenge to the existence of human populations there, because the main fight every day at the level of the common person there is to ensure that the seawater does not make ingress into the land. Essentially, across the world, wherever land masses have been below the mean sea level, rich countries have adopted major civil engineering technologies and structures, basically embankments and dikes. And these structures are obviously involving a lot of public funds. The Sundarbans also has its share of large embankments, pakka embankments, concrete embankments, which are made and maintained by the irrigation department of the government of West Bengal. But our approach is a unique one in which we are saying that the best protection to Sundarbans and its people can come if we go back to nature. So what you are seeing on your slide is basically a shot of the work that we have started in the Sundarbans, which could easily be termed as one of the largest plantation exercises in the world in a mangrove area. Next, please. Okay, so my presentation is very short. In fact, I have tried to put in nearly a dozen photographs at the end of my presentation, because we are all aware that a good photograph speaks 1,000 words, and I will not be needing to speak more and more on this. But this is a most unique endeavor, and in the very second slide, I'll try to take you through what makes this so unique. Sir, the first is that we are planting nearly 20 crore plants, and this is in a single plantation drive, and of which 19.5 crore will be mangrove and associate species. Apart from the size, this is also very unique because at a time when most government departments or most development agencies love to use large budgets and large technologies and a lot of equipment and construction sites, etc., we are basically saying that the best protection of ecologically vulnerable areas is going back to nature. Move away from civil engineering. Of course, resort to civil engineering where necessary and where unavoidable, but essentially go back to solutions being provided by nature, which we have ignored for the last many decades of our development. So we are talking about something which has now gained international currency. It's called community-based ecological mangrove restoration, CBEMR. The speed of purpose. As you might know that the super cyclone Amphan hit us on 20th May 2020, which was last year. And after that, we had started plantations, which started in August, over some 2,500 hectares. This year, the super cyclone Yas hit us on 26th May 2021. And after an in principle public announcement made by the Honorable Chief Minister, we were able to start plantations as early as on June 7, 2020, over some 850 hectares. Another very important and unique thing about this exercise was that, as opposed to, as I said, large budgets and large technology, etc., most of this is being done through what we call convergence of funds. Every department has funds, and in this exercise, we basically cut across departmental lines and we reached out to different departments so that funds could be pooled in. 92% of the total funds of rupees 75 crore come from the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, which is from the Panchayat and Rural Development Department, and less than 8% actually comes from the Forest Department. So it's all about convergence of resources and convergence of efforts. Another very important thing that we are very proud of in this scheme is that it is essentially being run by women's self-help groups. There are hardly any men here. So as you will see in the photographs also, this is generating huge rural employment for women across these blocks, across these islands. And of course, in the event, we are also protecting Sundarban, which is the world's largest delta, and its fragile biodiversity. Carbon sequestration, as we all know, is a very important challenge before the world. And every scientist is now telling us that carbon per se is not bad. Free carbon radicals in the air are bad, and if we can send them back to the soil, it is actually the best guarantee for the survival of planet Earth. So by planting these crores of nearly 20 crore plants in an eco-fragile biodiversity area, we are ensuring that carbon will be trapped by the leaves and through a process be sent down into the earth, which advanced countries now say that carbon sequestration is the best way to go. And while they are spending huge amounts of technology to trap it under earth in artificial ways, we are doing it in a sequestration that is essentially driven by the mangrove forests of Sundarbans. The long-term savings in terms of soil conservation and the savings in cost of embankment repair and maintenance, which is done by government departments like irrigation, and the savings in terms of loss of crops, apart from social costs in terms of human displacement after every natural disaster, are going to be substantial. And therefore, in terms of cost benefit analysis, with just an investment of some 75 crores, we are going to build a bioshield, which in terms of benefits in the next 8 to 10 years is going to be hundreds of times of the money that's being invested in this scheme. Next, please. Okay, so just to give you an example of how severe the problem of natural disasters is in Sundarbans. So as you can kindly see that in 2009 came Aila. It was a severe cyclone, 130 kilometers per hour at landfall. Bulbul was even stronger, 135 kilometers at landfall. Amphan last year was 185 kilometers at landfall, and Yas again 155. This is just to basically tell you about the severity of the natural disasters affecting this fragile territory. Next. So essentially, community-based ecological mangrove restoration, as you can kindly see that this entire project is being implemented under the country's flagship rural employment scheme called the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. This will provide 26 lakh man days or person days of employment between August 2020. It started last year, and the plantation of the current drive gets over in March 2022. So we're talking in terms of huge employment generation at the local level. Training of laborers and frontline staff for skill development. As you know, mangroves is something, it's a sapling or it's a technology that's not really available off the shelf. So the forest department is basically having to literally double up as a research and training institution, and we are training a large number of people in the coastal belts to tell them about what it takes to develop a seed, take it to the seedling sapling stage, to plant it, and then to thereafter look after it. The photographs will speak for themselves. Sensitization of the local people towards the need for mangrove forests, etc. People are now being told, they always knew it, it's part of their traditional knowledge, but they are again being told about how important it is to restore mangrove forests if we can or need to or want to protect the Sundarbans. And of course, there's a lot of coordination involved with district administration. First of all, identification of land banks, sanction of projects under MGNREGS. In fact, every scheme, there are more than 2,000 schemes which have been approved till now. And approval of 2,000 schemes spread across 3 districts was a time-taking process, but it was done. And coordination with other departments like irrigation, Sundarban Development Department, PWD, etc., has taken some time, but it's all about convergence, as we said in the second slide. Next, please. In 8 to 10 years, where do we expect ourselves to be? These mangrove species will not only provide a huge bioshield to us and the vulnerable areas of the Sundarbans, they will also provide livelihood opportunities to the community in terms of honey, fuel wood, fruit, fishery. Fishery is the mainstay here, the main economic activity in the areas of Sundarbans, and of course, ecotourism activity. Next, please. Now, what were the challenges? So immediately after the Honorable Chief Minister announced that we are going to plant 15 crore mangrove trees in the coastal belts of West Bengal, we needed to identify land. And this land was spread over 3 districts. So talking to the revenue authorities, the collectors, and sitting across the table with them and finding out what land was available close to the coastal areas, both private, public, etc., was a major challenge, but this was done in record time. The major challenge again in terms of the suitable plant species was that Sundarban is a very fragile territory and it only permits a certain kind of plantation to be done. So any indiscreet plantation of any species in this territory would mean disaster both for the soil and for the trees and for the people there. So we set up a committee, as we will show in the next slide, where the main job of the committee, comprising nearly 24 scientists, was to just tell us what kind of species and what kind of grasses, etc., could be planted on a massive scale in the typical soil conditions and the agroclimatic conditions of the Sundarbans. Every scheme had to be prepared on the basis of a DPR, which gets uploaded online. There is a portal under which the additional district collectors of these 3 districts approve these schemes. But before that, they were prepared by the DPR, by the Forest Department and DPRs. More than 2,000 DPRs were prepared for individual schemes. Training of laborers and frontline staff in mangrove management, plantations, etc. From propagule collection, nursery making, nursery maintenance, soil work, planting, and aftercare. And this scheme we have made very clear is not just about planting trees. We want to have a bioshield in about 8 to 10 years from now. So we, in the scheme itself, have undertaken plantation and taking aftercare for the next 3 years. So the scheme gets implemented in this financial year, but it provides funds and the mechanisms for taking care on the monitoring very intensively for the next 3 months, for the next 3 years, sorry. Next. Now, just to give you an idea of the land banking that was done. So there are 3 districts here. There is Purva Midnipur, there is South 24 Parganas, and there is North 24 Parganas, essentially in the coastal areas of West Bengal. And as you can see, Purva Midnipur has contributed 910 hectares. South 24 contributed the major share, 4,872, and North 24 Parganas contributed 567 hectares. And the total pool available to Forest Department for this massive plantation exercise is 6,349.60 hectares. As I was just telling you that this exercise is all about pooling of resources and pooling of efforts, less than 1/3 of this land bank actually is from the Forest Department. So while the Forest Department is spearheading this entire exercise, actually the contribution of land has come from departments other than Forest. The land bank identified the revenue land was done after a series of joint inspections with the district administration and local Gram Panchayat level sensitization meetings, village communities involving women self-help groups particularly. And this was done in record time, as I just said. Last week of the Yas, cyclone Yas had hit us in the last week of May, and yes, and the entire
To
exercise was
interrupt you, sir, could you please conclude your presentation in
okay.
next 2 minutes?
Yes, you will be happy to know that I don't have much to say after this. We have used technology to be able to fix responsibility and to make the whole exercise very transparent. People should know in the public domain there is information on what areas have been selected, what species have been planted. As you can just see, this we have shown, and this is available on our website also. Everything has been geotagged and shown that way. Preparation of DPRs, you can see 2,220 plantation schemes prepared, total cost of 75 crores in the last current year and the last year. 100 mangrove nurseries have been set up, from which more than 1 crore seedlings for mangrove species will come. As I just said, 3-year maintenance of these mangroves and other species. And for this entire massive plantation activity, less than 8% of the entire budget comes from the forest department. It's a shining example of the convergence approach. The expert committee that we set up by the state government comprised 24 eminent scientists and people working in environment. This committee has told us, next slide please, the exact species which could be planted in the mangrove areas, in the coastal shelter belt areas, and other areas. These are all technical terms. I am not going into them, but our entire exercise is based on the selection of these species and planting them in these vulnerable areas. If you just take a look at this slide, it's not just about plantation. To the left is the sea or the river. And then if you can kindly see, in the first tier is the mangrove. This we are doing in the first tier. Thereafter, as you go slightly higher on the land, which is above the tidal region, we are making another vegetative barrier and sand binders, basically through palisades. And if you climb higher on the shoreline, you will find that finally there is a third line of vegetation. This is all scientifically designed and planned, so that there is a whole forest kind of an approach. It is not just a line of trees, it is 3 layers of trees, all scientifically decided and identified, which is going to fortify the coastal regions of West Bengal. Next, please. The same slide, but in a different format. The blue, the sea is the blue. If you just take a look, the first region is the mangrove zone, where kankda and bain, they are local species, are going to be put. Then there is something called kea and ipomia, and these will form the palisades. And then we have something called jhau zone. Jhau is a local variety, which is for coastal zones. And then akashmoni tree. And there are other species like karanj and neem, which will be on the higher embankments. So as I said, there are various belts of vegetation protecting from the ingress of saline water. Next. Okay, we come to the last part of our presentation. As I said, pictures speak 1,000 words. I am now essentially going to leave you with these pictures. As you can see, field training of staff and laborers. They are standing. Our officer is literally knee deep in the mud, and here villages are being trained about the plantation exercise. Next. Madam, everything that we do, and including the identified seed production areas, our nurseries are geotagged, so that anybody working in the field will know where he has to collect his seeds from. So all our seed production areas have been geotagged. Next. This basically, all these photos show you the collection, transportation, screening, and grading of propagules. Propagules are picked up from the top of the mangrove trees, and then these are sifted, filtered, screened, and finally taken for plantation in the nurseries, or maybe direct plantation into the soil in the ready areas. Next, please. This is one of the nurseries that we have set up under our program. This is just one. There are many, many such. And as you can see, this is an aerial shot showing you how mangrove nurseries have been set up by the forest department, and all distribution of saplings is taking place through these nurseries. Next. Again, mostly you will see women in these photos because they are the mainstay of this scheme. They have set up these nurseries. They are working on the nurseries. Their job is to essentially supply saplings, propagules collected from the trees, maintained in our nurseries for a few months, and as soon as they generate roots, to be supplied to the various plantation sites. Next. This is a unique structure that we have tried for the first time this year based on our experience gathered last year. So based on the experience last year, we found that the ingress and egress of salt water was causing some mortality to the freshly planted mangroves. So we have started following what is called the fishbone structure. If you can take a look on the screen, this breaks the speed at which the water moves into the land or leaves land at high tide or low tide. This also makes silt deposits and silt retention feasible, based on which the mortality rate of new plantations gets reduced. Next, please. This is the fishbone structure that you just saw in the previous slide. This is after the silt deposition has taken place and the land is now ready for plantation of mangrove species. Next. These are various photos to show you how women are standing, in waist deep waters, walking through mud and slush. But this is the work that they have been doing, and this is entirely being driven by women of self-help groups in the Sundarbans. Next. The achievements so far, so 2,500 hectares of coastal mangrove plantation was done in 2021. As I said, last year we had done some things and we had planted more than 5 crore mangroves. A portion of this was adversely affected by cyclone Yas in 2021. So that infilling process has been taken up this year. Nearly 500 hectares of coastal mangrove plantation has been completed as of now, where about 1.5 crores of mangroves and associated plants have been planted. To your left is a scene from Digha Beach, the famous Digha Beach, where this new grass has been planted essentially as the first line of defense. And as I just said, you can see further plantation at the back. There are 3 different layers of vegetation. Next, please. Mangrove plantation created in 2020 over 40 hectares in a place called Jhadkhali. This is just to show you how propagales, when we keep them in our nurseries, generate roots, become bigger and are ready for transplantation. Next. Okay, this has grown into a people's movement. Nothing of this scale is possible or sustainable in the long run without being a people's movement. Recently, on the occasion of Raksha Bandhan, as you can see in the papers, and these are all press clippings from different newspapers, the women of Sundarbans came forward to tie rakhis on trees, on mangrove trees, essentially to convey the message that if there's anyone to protect us from natural disasters, it is these trees and it is this nature and the solutions offered by nature. Next. Women's self-help groups, they are a mainstay, as I just said. So these women in the boat are being taken to various locations to collect propagules. They will then come back, and on the right you can see that those propagules are being sifted, seeds are being collected, all being done by women. Next. Replicability and future road ahead. To take the scientific silvicultural management of these plantations over the next 20 years. So these mangrove green belts can become a permanent feature of the Sundarbans and the way we look after our coastal areas. We are doing a mapping of blank areas in these coastal districts so that wherever a blank area shows up, we are going to continue this plantation for the next 3 years to come so that the entire place is saturated with plantations. New silt deposit areas which are getting developed. As you know the geography of this place, while there is constant erosion, there's also constant accretion. So that exercise is going on with the help of satellite mapping and of course identification of vulnerable areas on the coast so that this exercise can be a permanent feature of our efforts. Next, please. And the journey from propagule, as I was just saying, so if you could see how the propagule grows from a little bud and then finally it goes to the sapling, the nursery, and then finally into the place where it is planted in the coastal areas. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. Basically, ma'am and sir, basically to say that this is something which doesn't involve high engineering. This is back to nature. This is back to people. This is the people's engineering really. And we are not spending too much money, but the environmental benefits that will accrue from it in the years to come are going to be huge in terms of the ecology, in terms of environment, in terms of protecting Sundarbans from rise in sea levels and from other effects of climate change. And with that, I conclude my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
I think it's a fantastic project and very innovative. I must congratulate you for this because not only you have done a convergence of many departments who came together and did this project together, both with in terms of funding and manpower like MNRGS and all that. So that is one thing which also many departments have done before. Though it is good, but that is not, you are not the only one who did it. But what you did, I like best about your presentation is that you have also combined with technological and scientific inputs. You know, the fishbone structure for silting, the silt and all that to stop them. And again, that the gradation of plantation, which is protecting or rather keeping the seawater, at bay or preventing it to go inside. So these are things which needs lot of thought, and I must say that you have done a great job in doing so. It's very well done. I have got no questions to ask. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
Sir, very good project. In fact, just a query. I think when massive plantation is done in these areas, then the velocity of the wind velocity during cyclone should also get reduced. So it will be a protection to the area for another uprooting of trees and all that. Am I correct?
Yes, sir, you are absolutely correct. So there are two things that happen geographically in the Sundarbans. One is the wind speed action. Basically, in a cyclone, there is a wind effect. And the other is that under the wind speed, and if there is a high tide at that point of time, ingress of saline water. And when the two happen together, the maximum devastation takes place. So if we create only one curtain, if only we create one line of, let's say, plantation, while that does reduce the wind speed to some extent as it moves inland, it basically is not strong enough. So as we just brought out in the plantation, it's a scientific way of doing 3 layers of plantation in the intertidal region, which is basically the region between the low tide and the high tide. There are the mangroves. As you move up, when you find some sandy areas, we have the palisades, which is essentially grasses, so that even if there is spillage of salt water in, the salt water can be absorbed by these grasses and the soil can be held together. Thereafter, there is a whole line of plantation, which I just said, trees like Akashmoni, Karanj, and Neem, which is as you move towards the villages. So we are talking in terms of literally a Miyawaki forest on the coastal areas, where 3 specific species or types of species are being planted one after the other to reduce the wind speed on the one hand, and also to reduce the impact of saline water ingress and flooding on the other.
Okay, very good. Very massive project. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.